The band who's hated on for being a group of sad dads, but who's also had success that's led them to working with pop royalty. It's The National. Welcome to Six Notes or Separation. If you're new to the podcast, here's how it's going to work. Every episode, I dive into an artist, exploring their lives, their musical careers, and any scandals they may have got themselves tangled up in. But to keep things fun and exciting and to keep you on your toes, I've put my own little spin on things. Every episode has to be linked to the previous and succeeding episode in some way. This could be through a producer the both two artists have in common. This could be through lyrics that they might reference each other in. It could be through a similar label. It could be through drama. Truly, anything goes as long as there's a connection. So, without further ado, we're going to be jumping into the members behind what's been deemed as the world's most influential band by The Telegraph. The quote-unquote middle-aged rockers who have found their influence spreading to pop giants such as Taylor Swift. And so we'll simultaneously be looking at the life of producer and band member of The National, Aaron Dessner. In a similar way to last episode's Bon Iver, I'll be focusing a bit more on the music side of things rather than any scandals, due to the fact there aren't many controversies linked to The National, but I'll also be zooming in specifically on band member Aaron Dessner, just like I did with Justin Vernon from Bon Iver. So I guess that reveals the first similarity between The National and Bon Iver, that idea that one band member has had a career and success of their own outside of the frameworks of the respective bands. But the link between Aaron and Justin Vernon actually crops up again in a much more indirect way. Aaron and Justin joined forces in 2018 to release music under the name Big Red Machine. The friendship and collaboration, however, began in 2008, which marked the breakthrough of Justin Vernon/Bon Iver's arrival in the music industry after they released their smash hit debut album Forever Ago. Aaron reached out to Justin on MySpace, sending him an instrumental he wanted Justin to sing on, and so this sparked what would become the indie rock duo Big Red Machine. In 2015, Vernon and Dessner co-founded and set up the music festival Eau Claire's, and in 2018 they released their debut album, which featured Phoebe Bridgers, following the Big Red Machine project up in 2021 with a second album featuring Taylor Swift. So I feel like things are starting to become a little more clear on what I meant when I said The National has led to collaborations with pop royalty, and why Aaron Dessner in particular had a big part to play in this. But let's take things back to 1976 in Ohio, where the Dessner twins were born. Oh yes, there's not one, but there's two guys. There's two. Brothers Aaron and Bryce Dessner appear to be these musical prodigies of twins, with Aaron having a natural talent to produce and songwrite, whilst Bryce's abilities leaned more into the skill of composing and arranging instruments. They were raised in a Jewish household, which Aaron interestingly said had a really profound impact on his work, due to the fascination he and Bryce both had over the liturgical religious melodies found in Judaism. Some qualities of these Jewish songs include an emphasis on pattern and repetition, as well as a tendency to move away from major chords, which you typically find in pop music. For example, Taylor Swift and Olivia Rodrigo have a vast majority of their songs based on the C, G, D major and A minor chord progression. I know nothing about music theory, so that might not resonate with people, but I did try and practice the piano for a couple months, and it genuinely shocked me how many songs are literally based off those four chords. I mean, if you've seen any like Simply Piano or whatever those like online piano tutorial videos, adverts, if you've seen any of them come up on your YouTube page, you'll know that every single one starts with, "You can learn the piano and over 1,000 songs in just 4 chords," and it's not wrong. It's not wrong, but that tends to be how pop music goes. It sticks to that chord progression, and it's not just Taylor and Olivia, like it's a bunch of artists in the pop industry. But I guess what kept the Dessner brothers fresh and exciting was this stray away from that convention, from that pleasing major chords energy, and moving to that of a more dissonant influence with the Jewish music instead. Moving on, in 1994, Aaron Dessner went to Columbia University to study modern European history, beginning a band called Project Nim whilst he was there. Again, in a similar way to Justin Vernon, he didn't think that music would be his career or path in life. It was purely just a hobby. Unfortunately, though, Project Nim broke up when he graduated in 1998, presumably because the members were all taking different, career paths and life paths. But as one door closed, another one opened for Brian Devendorf, childhood friend of the Dessner brothers and drummer of The National, came running in Aaron's direction. So here we've got one half of The National. We have Aaron Dessner, his twin brother Bryce Dessner, and their childhood friend Brian Devendorf. But how did the last two members come about? Well, my friends, it's time to park Aaron Dessner's life for a minute and move back to the conception of The National. So let's jump back a couple of years to 1991, where Matt Berninger and Scott Devendorf met while studying graphic design at the University of Cincinnati. And yes, you heard me correctly. There's another Devendorf. There's another set of brothers. We have Brian and Scott Devendorf. Clearly, Cincinnati was a breeding place of talented families in the 70s. I don't know how that, the coincidence of that, but I love it. Anyway, Scott and Matt meet through uni, and in a similar way to Aaron, they formed a student band called Nancy. As with most of these uni bands, Nancy broke up in 1995 when Scott and Matt graduated, leaving therefore the perfect opportunity for Scott's younger brother Brian to introduce the Dessner brothers to them. So in 1999, with all members bandless, Matt, Scott and Brian, and Aaron and Bryce joined forces to form what we now know as The National. The thought behind the band name is negligent. They genuinely just wanted something that was meaningless but not unusual, and also devoid of any interpretation. They released their self-titled album in 2001 through Brassland Records, a record label Aaron, Bryce and their friend Alec Bemis set up. But by 2004, they got a deal with Beggars Banquet Records, leaving the complications of running their own label behind them. It was this year that ultimately saw them have breakthrough success, with their EP All the Wine gaining them an opportunity to open for the rock band The Walkmen. What followed from this was huge career milestones that allowed them to finally quit their day jobs as graphic designers, software programs, and advertisers. So I think it took them at least 5 years of double timing music and working day jobs before they could fully devote their lives to the music world, which I think is really important to know. I mean, the idea of having to two-time working a day job with music is something so many musicians now face, especially because of streaming and Spotify and how easy and accessible music has become. It's caused less and less people to be able to make a living out of music. So the fact that it was happening here in the early 2000s, I think shows, kind of maybe foreshadows how much worse it was to get for the present day. You hear of artists now pulling out of tours, not being able to tour certain places, and really successful artists not being able to tour because they simply don't make money. The main aim artists have right now is to just break even. So yeah, I think it's quite fascinating that it did take the National about 5-ish years before they could fully take music as their career paths. With their third album, Alligator, released in 2005, the National landed firm places in Pitchfork and NME's greatest albums of the 2000s list, the same list which included Bon Iver's Forever Ago, as well as booking festivals such as Coachella, Reading and Leeds, Lollapalooza and Glastonbury. Their song Fake Empire featured in Obama's 2008 presidential campaign video, and they were even commissioned to write a song for the colossal show Game of Thrones. I know that this segment, I know everything I'm kind of chucking at you is quite fact heavy and potentially some might see as boring, but I think the context of the National success is so important when I'll go on to explain the influence of Aaron Dessner and how he shaped the landscape of pop music. In 2013, the National landed themselves with another huge screen production knocking on their door, none other than the Hunger Games franchise. And in 2018, they won their first Grammy for Best Alternative Music Album with their 2017 Sleep Well Beast, which was actually interestingly co-written with Matt's wife and journalist Karen Besser. So I think already you can see how massive the National's getting. They're creating music for these huge shows and film productions. They've earned a Grammy. They're at every single festival you can imagine. They're in the charts. But what's funny is I still feel like a lot of people have never heard of them. New music from The National wasn't heard until 2023 with the release of 2 new albums, a surprise double album situation. Due to a period of depression and writer's block, lead singer Matt Berninger suffered from during and post-pandemic. But whilst Matt struggled to find the right words to put into songs, Aaron Dessner became a household name within the producing and songwriting industry. In 2012, he produced Sharon Van Etten's album Tramp. A nice another link to Bon Iver here, being that Sharon and Justin Vernon were both under the same label, Jaguar. And in 2016, he produced Frightened Rabbit's Painting of a Panic Attack. Probably 2 artists you haven't heard of and maybe aren't aware of. But things change. Things change in 2020. Aaron gets launched into producing for the artist who I think it's fair to say acts as a symbol or human embodiment, if you will, of pop music. He ends up being approached by Taylor Swift to produce what would become her 2 pandemic albums, Folklore and Evermore. I presume that Taylor was familiar with Aaron's work due to the success of The National, but also due to his partnership with Bon Iver, as I mentioned at the top of this episode, as Big Red Machine, as their kind of duo band. Justin being an artist Taylor has always wanted to work with. And that dream collaboration of hers very much came true, with Exile from Folklore and the title track from Evermore being some of the respective album's biggest songs, both featuring Bon Iver. They are stunning songs. You can't fault them. As much as you might want to hate Taylor Swift, you cannot fault those songs. They're impeccable. And I just love that Aaron Dessner was the bridge between them. Folklore went on to win Album of the Year at the 2021 Grammys, and Dessner has gone on to continue to work with Taylor alongside Jack Antonoff on all her subsequent projects. Now, guys, Jack Antonoff, if you've listened to one of my very first episodes on Jack Antonoff, you'll be very familiar with the man. If you don't know who he is, he's a bit of a Dessner, to be honest. He's the same kind of incredible producer, works with all the biggest pop legends you can think of. Like, Jack's worked with, obviously, Taylor, Lana Del Rey, Lorde. Oh my God, there's so many more that I don't have on the top of my head right now. But he's truly worked on everything with everyone. And I wouldn't be surprised if he was... Oh, I think he's even worked a little bit with Olivia Rodrigo. I wouldn't be surprised if he would go on to work with Chappell Roan. Like, genuinely, the impact and influence he's had on shaping how pop sound is, or how pop does sound in the 2010s, has been incredible. Like, he's everywhere. But whilst... this is my bone to pick with the man. Oh, he's also worked with Sabrina Carpenter. Forgot to mention that one. Whilst he's fab. You can't deny that he's fab. He's incredible. Like, the albums he's produced are amazing, and they've all gone on to land like #1 spots and Grammy nominations. Like, he's incredible. He's a genius. But my bone to pick with him is I think he's fresh. When he works with a new artist for the first time, he's amazing and creates something really fresh. But I think when he stays with an artist for too long, that's when it all starts to go a bit downhill. And maybe that's, what I'm thinking about here is really Taylor. I'm really thinking about Midnights and Tortured Poets just not being it. I think Jack was there for a bit on 1989 and Reputation. Don't quote me on that, but I think he was. He had a part to play in those, and they're great albums. But by the time we got to Midnights, it's just a bit disappointing. By the time we got to Tortured Poets, again, disappointing. And what's really, really fascinating is that Aaron Dessner worked on both of these albums, but Aaron Dessner seemed to work more on the kind of deluxe versions. So with Midnights, there was, I don't know if you're aware of Taylor's discography, but there was Midnights, the album, and then the 3am edition of Midnights, which I think was released at like midnight or 3am or something, but basically included like a bunch of other songs to be included on the album, sort of like a deluxe. And Aaron Dessner produced the majority of that 3am edition, those extra songs that we didn't originally see on Midnights. And whilst I think people's first impression of Midnights was a bit like, slightly disappointing and no one really wanting to admit it, everyone adored and loved the 3am edition. And do we know why? It's because Aaron Dessner produced it. And I think the same can be said for Tortured Poets. Not many people, in fact, this is me, like, my personal opinions, but I think a lot of people's first impressions were obviously like not great, not good, bit of a flop of an album. And then the anthology, which was the surprise second album, the double album, again, I think produced predominantly more by Aaron than the original being produced by Jack. And people preferred it. Everyone said the anthology is way better. And why? Because Aaron Dessner had more production credits on that half of the album. So I don't really know where that tangent was going, but I just think it's fun to point out that Aaron Dessner seems to produce a bit more magic than Jack Antonoff. But that being said, I feel like I could so easily get into arguments with people here because they're going to whip out all of the albums Jack's ever worked on, and they're all fantastic albums. Like, I know that. I know his discography. I know he's great. I just think his time with Taylor should come to an end, respectfully. Anyway, something I found really, really fascinating about the writing process of Folklore is that a lot of the songs that ended up on the album were actually meant to be the National songs. The writing process for the National kind of goes like this. It starts with Aaron Dessner creating these productions, creating maybe like a clip of a piano melody he has, and then his brother Bryce will hop in and arrange other instruments and kind of, you know, put in a bass and put in a drum, and then the other band members will obviously perform that. So the Devendorf brothers will then hop on and do the drum parts that Bryce has composed and arranged, or, you know, fulfill Aaron's production vision. That's kind of how it goes. The music always comes first, and what comes last is Matt Berninger's lyrics. He then listens to it and puts melodies to it or puts lyrics to it. But this process is very, very similar to how Aaron and Taylor worked. So what ended up happening is when Matt was going through this lockdown, pandemic, depression and writer's block that I mentioned, these instrumentals that Aaron had and wanted to work on, he ended up sending to Taylor, because obviously Taylor had reached out at the time. And Aaron just thought, well, there's nothing happening here with the National, so let me just send them to Taylor. And what was born out of that was the two lead singles from the album, Cardigan and Willow, which are two of the biggest songs off of Folklore and probably of 2020. They were huge. I think especially Cardigan, it was just everywhere. You couldn't escape it. But funny enough, equally, this song stealing happened in the opposite way too. A lot of the songs that Aaron had written for Taylor with Taylor in mind, Matt Berninger got to first. So he'd end up writing lyrics to these instrumentations instead of Taylor. Those songs are undisclosed. Like, we don't know which songs ended up being the National songs instead of Taylor songs. But I just think it's really interesting because I think had Matt Berninger got to Cardigan and Willow before they became Cardigan and Willow, before they became Swiftified, would they have had the same success? Because I think not. And I think that, again, is a testament to Taylor's talent. As much as we can all be fed up with her, as much as we can all have Taylor Swift fatigue, you have to give her credit that she's incredibly talented, because turning Aaron's productions into smash hit singles hasn't happened under the National. But despite the wider world being introduced to Dessner, not only through Taylor's music, but also through the documentary film she did for Folklore, where you got to meet the kind of producers behind the album, which of course was Dessner, the public opinion on Dessner during the pandemic wasn't all positive. In June of 2020, Aaron Dessner was cancelled online, specifically on Twitter, now known as X, for being an alleged Antifa organiser. If you don't know what Antifa are, they're a left-wing, anti-fascist and anti-white supremacy political movement in the US. Their willingness to use violence to get their point across kind of being what sets them apart from other left-wing political groups. But where the controversy begins is when a Twitter user posted a video of a bearded white man paying black protesters to allegedly start a riot. Again, context, it's 2020, all the BLM movement is going on. The Twitter user said the man in the video was the one and only Aaron Dessner, tweeting, "Meet Aaron Dessner. He's an Antifa organiser paying people to riot. He needs to be arrested now." What followed from this was an absolute outburst of fury and rage online from right-wing supporters and groups who started to advocate for the arrest of Dessner and all other members of the National, in some cases calling for their heads, calling for their deaths. It was ludicrous, genuinely ludicrous. None of this obviously fact-checked, none of this evidence-based, purely all conspiracy from a video. Now, as we know, Elon Musk, who's probably going to make all of this content reach absolutely no audiences because he controls everything. Thank you so much, Elon. Elon Musk famously took over Twitter in 2022, rebranding it to what we now know as X. And unless you've been living under an absolute rock recently, Musk is a hard right-wing supporter, endorsing the German AfD party, which is renowned for its neo-Nazi views. At the top of this year as well, Musk famously performed a gesture at Donald Trump's presidential inauguration, the question obviously being, was it a Roman salute or Nazi salute? Maybe if you want to go back 2 seconds to what I just said about what party he endorsed, you can come to some conclusions, but you know what? A question mark's a question mark nevertheless. But I guess the point I'm trying to make is that it's no secret that Twitter, or X, has increasingly become a platform for the voices of the hard right. So the fact that Aaron Dessner had this nasty and bubbling online response to the accusation that he was an Antifa organiser, I suppose should come as no surprise. Aaron responded to the outburst with a photo of the countryside and a caption that read, "I am not the person some are suggesting I am, and I would never support violence of any kind." Going on to say, however, I do fully support peaceful protests and activism against endemic racism and racially motivated violence in this country, which somehow continues generation after generation after generation. Like so many, I'm hoping for peaceful resolution and actual progress addressing these persistent issues in our society. I mean, an eloquently and succinctly put response in comparison to the transgressive quips some of the hard right responders were writing. There's not really much else to say on it other than it was just, the whole thing was conspiracy theory, and he got all this hate and all this attention that he was this kind of, hard left, violent activist, when in actuality he was isolating in his country residence, I think in New York or something. But it turns out that the real man in the video, if you're wondering, wasn't an Antifa organiser either, merely gathering supplies to aid those who had been hurt by excessive police force instead. And yeah, I mean, we don't need to go into a huge tangent about it, but I just think that's such a clear example of misinformation online and headlines and how they snowball, and especially Twitter, just the Twitter storms that ensue from conspiracy theories, from misinformation. I mean, it's mad how much people just jump on bandwagons and retweet and repost and comment and just have these sound bites that go astronomical, when actually if you go back to the root source, the video, there's absolutely no evidence that it was ever Dessner in the first place. Anyway, it would be a lie to say that this controversy ruined or stained Dessner's career in any way. After working with Taylor in 2020, all these opportunities to work with other artists started to appear. In 2021, Dessner produced Gracie Abrams' This Is What It Feels Like, leading him to then produce her follow-up debut album Good Riddance in 2023, which acted as her breakthrough, landing her a spot on the Eras tour as an opener album. In the same year, he also produced 2 albums for Ed Sheeran, Subtract and Autumn Variations. Probably some of Ed Sheeran's most successful albums to date, or as of late. A lot of his albums were kind of getting hate and getting, a bit samey and a bit boring and a bit predictable, and Autumn Variations and Subtract were really the first deviation from the generic pop Ed was putting out and Ed was producing. Aaron also holds producing credits on Fred Again and Brian Eno's collaborative album Secret Life, a phenomenal album and 2 phenomenal artists, and he continued to work with Gracie and Taylor in 2024, as well as leaving his mark on Mustafa the Poet's album Dunya. So yeah, it's safe to say that whilst The National plods along, making music with mixed reviews, Aaron Dessner is charging ahead, driving the sound of the pop landscape with every producing credit he holds. Whilst producers in a similar vein to Dessner become scapegoats for ruining artists' work, Jack Antonoff, I'm looking at you and what you did to the Deutsche Poets department. The simplicity and rawness of Dessner's acoustic production style is what earns him a glowing review of bringing the best and most vulnerable lyrics out of an artist. Nothing that Dessner's touched has ever become rejected by the public or the critics. So as he continues to land collaboration after collaboration with some of the industry's most loved talent, I think it's fair to sit on the question of if Dessner's inspiration from Jewish music has enabled him to channel some divine power into making infallible art. And on that note, it's time to wrap up the episode here. Thank you all so much for listening. I hope you enjoyed this episode. I know it was not one full of scandal and stories and plot twists, but I think it's one that's important in understanding the producers behind current pop music. And yeah, please follow us on TikTok and Instagram at Six Notes Podcast. I'll be back with another episode on another artist where we'll be exploring the link between them and Aaron Dessner / The National.